Hello, everybody. So I'm Paula Mackiewicz Armstrong. I'm here on behalf of the Polish Gamedev Workers Union. And me and my friend over here, this guy, we ran a survey last year about
Actually,
the topic.
that was January this year, but
January
it was
this year,
about
yes.
the last year.
Yes, we discussed it last year. Yes, on the topic some of you might have experienced, probably most of you, which is crunch and overtime and how we deal with that and what's the data. So, yeah, let's get into it. We'll be covering 4 parts. The first one will be methodology and the thesis for this presentation specifically. The second one will be overtime and pay. And then we'll move from overtime in general into proper crunch and how it affects developers. And then we'll have a bit about conclusions and Q&A.
Okay, so let's start with a brief introduction, so you know how we actually gathered the data. We analyzed the time frame from 1st January to 31st December last year. So when we were asking people how much do you work, were you crunching, and stuff like this, these are data for the last year. The survey took place in January this year. We gathered 660 something viable, how do you say, enquete responses? Yeah, and that is about 5% of the Polish game dev industry. So it could be enough to draw some conclusions. The answers we gathered through LinkedIn, social media, like thematic groups and forums on Facebook, through our internal channels, like the trade union channels, by word of mouth. And the answers are rather what people told us. We have no way of knowing how truthful they were, but that's how it is with surveys like that. And what do we know about people who answered the survey? 10% of them were juniors, most were mid-specialists, seniors, then experts. We've conducted similar survey for the last 3 years about salaries, and this is probably how our industry looks right now. Most of them worked 5 years or less in the industry, and when we ask about the area they were working on, the specialization, the biggest is code, art, and design, and then the other specialties. So that's who responded to the survey. And we also asked, do you manage a team? It has, regardless of your seniority level or your job title, because we wanted to test the hypothesis that, or to learn whether team leaders crunch more or less than team members. And we learned something, we'll talk about it later. And 25% of our respondents were women, most of them were men. That's how the industry looks right now, according to what we know.
Yeah, look around you and yes. Mm-hmm. All right, now some data about the companies that our respondents work in. So we mostly got data from the big boys in the industry, and also, you know, some of the smaller ones. And then where do you work from? Now, this is interesting because it still seems to be that remote work is holding quite strong in Polish game dev. We're 50% remote and only 20% full-time in office. So maybe that's something to consider. And type of contract. Well, no surprises there. only 36% of our respondents are employed on a employment contract, umowa o pracę. Then we have a huge chunk on B2B, specific work, so umowa o dzieło. Other way around. And then, specific work, umowa o dzieło, and then mandate, which is zlecenie. And a small bit that work on their own stuff.
Yeah. So when we also asked about crunch, because when we look at the Wikipedia, they say that in video game industry, crunch is compulsory overtime during the development of the game. But when you talk to people actually working in the industry, there are various definitions of crunch, and we were curious what we really think what crunch is when we feel we are crunching, and that's what we were asking about. So what we gathered from the responses, this was an open-ended question, and we analyzed almost 700 responses, and it looks like that for most of us, crunch is an overtime that is obligatory, long-lasting, and close to a milestone. And for some of the respondents, they described it as intensive, stressful, and exhausting. But for most of us, it seems that it's mandatory, long-lasting, and close to a milestone. So that's what most of us think when they say they are crunching.
Now, crunch as a problem in the last 20 years or so, there has been an increased amount of media scrutiny when it comes to the topic of crunch in game dev. The big breakthrough moment was the EA spouse letter about their partner just never being there due to work. And can you imagine, it was 19 years ago. Gosh, time flies. But the problem seems to still be here, and year after year there's a big release, and there's the topic of crunch. Did people crunch? How much they crunched? How it affected the game? Now, it is our thesis that it used to be that crunch was seen as an unavoidable part of games development. And now the viewpoint has shifted that crunch is a problem that should be avoided as much as possible. You can see that in the answers to the question, what is your company's official communicated policy on crunching? And the majority are saying, we never crunch, or we try to crunch as little as possible. Now, do you agree that the viewpoint has shifted? Anybody, hands up if you agree with the second statement. Yes, the second statement. Crunch is a problem. Okay. Yeah.
So the perception probably shifted. And what about the realities? We'll talk about it soon. Okay, now let's take a look, because when I was personally talking with people about crunch, they were okay. People say they are crunching, but other really some. So we decided to look at first on the hard data. How much overtime do we really do in the industry? And we started with just reminding ourselves what the Polish labor code says about overtime. So according to the law, overtime has to be initiated by the employer in special occasions, like rescue activities, to safeguard the life and health of others, resolving a fault. But it cannot be used, according to law, as a normal way of conducting business. It cannot be pre-planned. It has to be a reaction to a special situation that couldn't be predicted. And according to the law, overtime during at nights and on weekends and holidays should be paid additional 100%, and all other overtime should be paid 50% bonus. And this applies only by the law to umowa o pracę, to the contract of employment. So you can see that here the problem begins, let's say. And yeah.
Yes, now, people crunch and should be paid for the overtime they do. And what Artur said, this applies only to umowa o pracę, contract to employment. But come on, employers, just because you don't have to pay the additional 50% to your B2B workers or whatever, doesn't mean you shouldn't. So let's get that out of the way. Now, you need to track overtime to know how much people are working. So let's look into reporting and the practices around tracking it. Who initiates overtime? Now, in the previous slide, it should always be the employer. The reality, as we see, is quite different. Are you obliged to report overtime? Again, 40%, no. Now that's a problem, because it should always be tracked and should always be paid. If it's not tracked, then it's like it didn't happen, right? And do you actually report overtime? No, most people do, thankfully, but not always. Sometimes it's just, it's an hour here and there, I don't really mind. Sometimes there are other reasons.
Yeah.
And now let's get into pay.
Yeah, so we asked, are you actually paid for overtime? And that's what we learned. First, let's take a look at this 100% bonus for working at weekends. So most of the people is not paid that bonus if they work over weekends. 24% is paid. And sometimes there is like less than 100%. So that's not ideal. The 50% bonus for regular overtime, well, 62%, no, they are not paid. Okay, 36% are paid. So, okay, not great, not terrible, as they used to say. And does your employer actually pay for overtime? 57%, yes, they do. But 30%, nope. And 5%, sometimes. And 8%, no, but we get 3 days. But according to the law, for every day I spend, for every hour I spend working overtime, if I'm not paid but giving free time, I should receive 1.5 hour free time. So that's also, not many people know that, and not many employers, probably. So yeah, we looked at paid overtime by contract type, because we assumed, basing on our knowledge and other answers, that most of civil contracts like B2B or mandate or specific work, this is just a cost optimization, and in fact there is a relationship of employment. So when we look at it, when you are employed on contract of employment, you are usually paid for overtime, and if you do specific work, well, you are fucked. You're probably not. So yeah, that's how it looks. Yeah, and now let's make a introduction to the question of crunch.
Yes, or as it's known in the labor code, excessive overtime. Now, the labor code requires at least 11 hours of uninterrupted rest. So we took any time of any workday that's longer than 13 hours as an example of excessive overtime. Labor code also says that people can't work more than 48 hours per week. I personally have experienced much longer weeks, and I'm sure others as well. And there shouldn't be more than 150 hours of overtime per year. Now, how it stacks up. Excessive overtime in 2023 doesn't look too bad. it's the long days, sometimes happen, and the long weeks also sometimes happen. But it seems people are mostly staying within the limit of the 150 hours per year for last year. We don't have data for previous years. And excessive overtime versus company size, it seems pretty similar across the board. The smallest companies have less of this excessive overtime, but other than that, it stays within range of 60-something% for sometimes. But with the smallest companies, for a smaller amount of people, it happens more often. Yeah, we have the big sort of 10% of routinely, 11% often, and then sometimes. Excessive overtime versus contract time. Again, we see this sort of contract affecting the data. That people who are doing specific work, well, they're the ones hardest hit with this idea of excessive overtime. On other types of contracts, it's a bit more even. Excessive overtime versus discipline. Well, artists sure crunch a lot, as do QAs, and I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you. Code also, design and production seems to be less. Excessive overtime versus seniority. Now, the biggest overtime sufferers seem to be juniors. How many juniors can you throw at a problem, right? And also principals and directors. Excessive overtime versus time in the industry. Again, the people who are here the shortest seem to be easiest to convince or pressure into working this time of overtime, while people who have a longer tenure seem to be more resilient and probably better at figuring out work-life balance. Excessive overtime versus remote work. We all know that people who work from home are lazy and don't really do anything. Well, actually not. That's not true. They actually work slightly more overtime than their colleagues who are hybrid and more than their colleagues who are in the office, at least on the level of, often. And it's easy to explain. It's harder to achieve this job-home separation when you're working in the same place. You get up, you work, you do a little longer, and you close your laptop. Okay.
Okay, so these were like hard data, because we could compare the declaration with the actual labor code. And we did do that because we also asked specifically, did you experience crunch in 2023? And 27% responded yes, I did crunch I did crunch last year. So then we could compare like these declarations with the data whether the people worked excessive overtime, just to be sure how people see it. And we also asked an open question: why did you crunch? And it was usually it boils up to this, that the project was badly managed. We had to work harder to meet a milestone. In the full report, you can read all 600 answers, and they are very similar. My project was poorly managed. Yeah. And we asked, when do we crunch? And this is not a surprise. Most people crunch before the release or before the final milestone, which throws a different light at the answer that 1/3 of the game developers crunched this year. Because if we think that projects last 5 years, it might mean that everyone will crunch during the project when it's close to the release. That's a hypothesis, but well, the data seems to be shaped that way. And if you crunched, was the crunch officially announced? Half of the answer, almost half the answer was yes, and the other half was no. It just, we just were silently pressured into it. And we compared the experience of crunch with the official statements of the company. And, well, the companies that said crunch was okay really did crunch significantly more. But also in the companies with strict no crunch policy, well, almost 80%, 75% said, yes, we crunch sometimes or often. So yeah, it seems not to be so, clear cut. Sorry.
All right. Now, let's see at some more data about the people who crunched or not. Crunch versus age. So again, we see the spread of the younger you are, the more crunch you experience. And who crunched in your team? And the majority seems to be that either everyone in the team or most of the team. There are some outliers, but it's very, very little. When there's crunch to be done on a milestone or on a feature, everybody connected to that feature has the extra work. And here's a fun one. Did you feel pressured to crunch? And the answer seems to be mostly yes. 50% of answers are definitely pressured. Now, that pressure can take different forms. It can be, you want that promotion, so you have to show your worth and your commitment and everything. It can be, if we don't do this, we won't deliver the project and the company will fail and go up in smoke. Or it can be, you see your team crunching and like, what, you're gonna just leave at 5 p.m. when they're still working? Well, no, that's not something we want to do as human beings, as team members. There's many different ways to pressure people into crunching and into excessive overtime. And did you crunch more in 23 than in 22? Here the data is more optimistic. It seems fewer people experienced crunch. It was significantly less. But again, it comes back to the hypothesis, like who is releasing what when? And if we run the survey across, multiple years, or did you crunch during a project, then we might get different answers. And do you expect to crunch in 2024? 50-50, maybe not. We'll see.
Okay. So now the conclusions. This presentation is pretty short because we want to spill some data on you and leave some time for you to ask questions, because I think there is a lot of things you might be interested. But 81% companies says they are against crunch. I think that's good. But
still, 27% of our respondents crunched in 2023.
And although 27% said they crunched, 70% of people worked more than the labor code allows.
And 26% still expect to crunch in 2024.
So we could say it's like out of fashion, still in business when it comes to crunch. We say it's bad, but we probably do it anyway. And one thing that's not solid enough to be put on slide, but it's interesting, there were some answers, a small number of answers that were like, I want to do it. I want to crunch. That's my initiative. I just have strong work ethics. I care about what I do. I just wanted to fix my mistakes. So there is a number of game developers, probably some of us can sympathize, who see that it's their responsibility to stay longer and work harder, even though one could argue that this is the job of the management and production to plan the work in such a way that it is doable within the time that we have. The full reports are much more longer and much detailed. You can download them in English and in Polish just by scanning the QR codes, and so feel free to share them, to read them, to ask us questions, and now question time.
And also, aside from questions, we invite you to comment yourselves.
Yeah, you can argue. You can argue.
Yeah, you can argue with us, or you can agree. What is your take on crunch?
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I came in late, so I might skip it, but did you cross-check the excessive overtime with layoffs last year? And did you see any conclusions that if someone didn't work more, that they may be under pressure to be fired?
That's a good question. We didn't ask that question. There is a community salary survey happening right now. And in this survey, we do ask questions about layoffs. But when we designed this research, we weren't sure. We were still hoping that this year would be easier on layoffs. It proved not to be the case. So we'll ask about it in the next edition.
And also, layoffs is a topic that could have its own survey. And we are worried about packing too many questions and too many different issues into one survey. Okay, other questions or comments? Yeah.
Please use the mic that's in the middle.
Hi. I remember filling this survey, and at that time I was wondering whether I know the definition of crunch, right? Because at some point, I know people that they sometimes work 1 hour, 2 hours, half hour there during the week, and it accumulates over, for example, 8 hours, 10 hours, maybe let's say something like this. But it doesn't feel like mandatory crunch, but they still have accumulate maybe 30 hours over a month. And they wouldn't say that they are crunching or the company is pressuring them. And well, that was something that when I was filling the survey, I was still wondering what I can still call a crunch or not. When there was were questions about hours, I could fill them quite easily because hours are easily accountable. But whether it was already crunch or not, I wasn't so sure. And then there is no really questions. Perhaps there's maybe
yes.
Whether do you take into consideration when making a survey in the future?
We were thinking the same way when designing the survey, because crunch is something subjective. I can work very hard and say I'm not crunching. So we asked an open-ended question to gather as many responses as possible without suggesting any answers, and then we analyzed them. And okay, for example, there were 6% of people who said any overtime is crunch. Any overtime is crunch. But overwhelming majority answered that crunch is when I'm pressured to work long overtime near a milestone or for the good of the project. So I think that's the sum of our subjective views. And then we compared these answers with the hard data about hours. And as you can see in the full report, people who reported that they crunched, they really worked more excessive over hours than people who reported that they were not crunching. So probably we know when we crunch. So I would just trust our instinct, our group instinct.
All right, thank you.
And also, listen, there's overtime in every industry, in every job, sometimes, and occasional overtime because you need to finish something up or because there's an important issue or something is not a problem. Now, crunch and the overtime culture we have in game dev is systemic and it's still present. This is the way we make games and this is what we need to do to deliver those games. Now, we want to challenge that. Like today at Sven Vike's presentation, I asked, did you guys crunch? And he said, we did some overtime, yes. But we never stayed super late. 8 p.m., 9 p.m., the office was empty, and we didn't do weekends. And still, they released the game that won all of the awards.
Yeah, I would say that for me, the crucial part is that overtime cannot be legally used as a normal way of conducting business. So if I am in a company that's using overtime as a routine way of conducting business, I'm probably in a bad place. That's my personal take on that.
Yes, hi. I have a comment about this very topic you mentioned. I talked about it with my colleagues, experienced developers, and they say that it was always like that. And like I did crunch in my previous company and my previous company, so it's like natural way of doing things. Another experienced developer said that, oh my God, it's in movie industry, it's much worse when you have to deliver on specific date and you have to stay 24 hours. So what's the mess? And I think this is still the problem, that people don't see it as a problem.
Yes. So, yes. So I must say, because I worked in the industry like 18 years, or something like this. And when I started, crunch was extremely normalized. Like I had an episode when I was sitting in front of a computer 36 hours in a row. And I thought, oh, that's, an adventure. It was not, yeah. But so I expected that maybe half of the answers would be, yes, I crunched. So I was presently surprised as an old man that it is 27%. But on the other hand, we have no other data points. We will see in a year, in 2 years, how it shapes. And what Paula already said, there was a change. Now crunch is not seen as something sexy. A small number of companies said, yes, crunch is okay. Most of companies said, no, we try not to do this. But how it is? Well, there's a hypothesis that's hard to prove yet, that even if that the management is like, or the planning of the production is still not very well done, but instead of crunching, there's the cycle of overemployment and layoffs. So instead of having the people we have work 24 hours, we just hire more people than we need, throw them at the problem, and then lay them off after the release. But it's a new idea, and we'll have to look at it and gather data over the next maybe 3 years to see if it is the case.
And so I know, some people, I won't name names, who 10, 15 years ago in the media said things like crunch is necessary. We cannot make the games we make without crunch. If we had to strictly adhere to the labor code, games would never get made. Now, those same people are introducing no crunch policies in their studios. Because it's not a question of can we make games with or without crunch? The big question is it worth it? Does crunch result in good games? And I think we have had some high-profile examples, again, not naming things, that overwhelmingly answered no. People worked 60 hours, people worked hundreds of hours of overtime, and the game came out and it wasn't worth it. And then you have burnout, then you have people leaving in droves, brain drain, and you have to establish entire departments from grounds up. So is crunch worth it, both for the employees, for their mental health and capacity and so on, and for the company itself? And my big argument is that it is not. We need a better way.
Yeah, but it's, as you said, it's I think it's really grounded in the company culture, and I've heard something that I really like from someone who is running a company, and he said, the problem is not to release a game, the problem is to release a game and still have a team who is willing to work on the next game with you. So that would be nice if more companies operated under these assumptions.
Thank you very much. I have also one comment about the age. Me, myself, when I get older and my family get bigger, I see that I'm resilient to crunch. And simply, I see that it doesn't matter. If the game fails, it's just a job. I have my own life. And I think it goes along with your data that the older the people, maybe they have to have big families, but they simply have, I don't know, health issues, and they simply more, I don't know, they simply saw more or are more experienced than that they can distinguish they can see where is the border. This is work, this is life, I have to limit it. And
yes,
that's my comment.
So on a personal note, I'm 32 years old and I had cancer last year. Don't worry, it's sorted, it's gone, it's cool. But, it made me think about things. I love my job, it's great, it's fantastic, I'm working on cool things, but I love my husband more. I love hanging out with him. I love playing board games with my friends. I love playing with my cat. And I want to have time for all of that and the job. If the job starts taking up all of my time, then I'm not living my life. And you never know what's gonna happen to you, to your body, to your health in the future.
Yeah, and I think, and this will sound sad, I think, but I heard that this is an industry that lives on the dreams of young people. So if you are young, you feel that you have to earn your place in the industry. Sometimes you do, because there's a huge competition, but also this is an adventure. That's my experience. Yeah, I'm doing great things. I'm working, let's say, on the wheelchair. So yes, I will live in the company for 3 months because that's my choice. But also that's like my health issues, yeah? or stuff like this. So yeah, young people I think are more are in a position when it's really easy to pressure them to crunch or to make them pressure themselves into crunching.
First off, thank you for sharing your personal story. I appreciate that. I wanted to ask, and it's good that you, Artur, mentioned this just now. This fan approach of being, young and enthusiastic, etc., and that leading to burnout. Have you guys considered adding burnout to either the survey in future years, or to making a survey about burnout, or maybe you anticipate there's just not enough veterans in the industry yet for that to be worthwhile? What's your take on that?
That's a good question, because we did think and discuss about it. I talked about it with some psychiatrists, and their general advice was, if you're not a psychiatrist, don't do surveys about burnout, because this is a medical term. But last month there was a survey on burnout made by SWPS, by a Polish university, focusing on burnout in Gamedev. And I'm in contact with them, and it still is.
Still running, okay.
Okay, so it is still running. You have to Google it somehow and fill it. And I'm really curious what the results will be, and maybe we'll build on that, or at least maybe we could share that, yeah?
We could do so many surveys, like there's so many topics to cover. Maybe, you know, when Artur and I were like tired of making games, we'll just make surveys instead, but this is not the time yet.
Gotcha. It came to my mind just because you guys did, I think, good work in terms of having people define crunch for themselves and then comparing that to the labor code. I thought that was very helpful, and I wondered how that would track to burnout. But I understand that from the conversations you had, it seems like that's somebody different's ballpark. So
yes, I don't feel
sense.
competent enough to prepare such a survey.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I would like to get back to the idea about young people working more, which is unfortunately a norm in every single industry. That's actually normal. It's opposite to games. When we gain experience, our stamina goes down in our life. That's the reality. So even on this room, I just see that this topic, which is incredibly important topic, we don't have a lot of young people here. That's where we already see that they don't even think yet about the stress on their life from overwork, from crunch. But yeah, that was very informative. I don't actually have a question. I have a word I would like to share with everyone, which I learned around my 30s, since I was also a stupid young person at some point. But work for life, don't live for work.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you.
definitely. Thanks. That's the thing that, yes, young people work more because they feel they have to prove themselves. Often that is true. But also in game dev, and I've noticed it in my experience, they are these crucial mid-level positions, sometimes managers, sometimes programmers with specific skills, which are subject to something I call the bus factor. If this person is hit by a bus tomorrow, will the company fall apart, or will their team or their section fall apart? And in a lot of cases, we have these people in companies, and they also work incredibly long hours because there's nobody else to pick up the slack, to replace them, to take off the load. And I think that's also important to consider. These people are also often paid very good money. But again, like, where is the balance here? What's worth what?
And not on the topic of crunch, but because we and you talked a lot about age, I'm wondering one thing. About in maybe 10 years, I think our industry for the first time will hit the retirement age, maybe in 15 years. And I'm really curious what will happen then. I mean, because, you know, all of us on B2B contracts, on umowa o zlecenie, will have to face the realities of being old. And yeah, so, but that's for the future. I'm just raising a flag that there's another problem looming on the horizon. If you have any more questions, yeah.
Hey, first of all, thank you for this report. It was very good and very informative. And also your reports about the salaries, it's also a great job. So I wanted to appreciate it as well. And my question is, or thesis, hypothesis, because game dev is quite a creative industry. And during the production process, lots of things are changing, and because of those changes, there then happens the crunch, usually. And I wonder what could be the approach in order to avoid the crunch. That's it. Thank you.
You know, that is a good question, and I don't have a good answer. If I knew how to, you know, plan a production, I will probably have my own studio and I would run a successful production. But I had a friend who worked in IO Interactive in Denmark, and they had this approach that was, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe. So we were after CD Projekt, so we had, like the old CD Projekt, we had really skewed views on how games should be made. And he said, it's incredible, because if I say, I'm not sure if I have enough time to program this feature, but maybe I'll do, I don't know, a few overtime or just work a bit harder and it will be done. And the producer was always, no, we are dropping the feature. If it's not doable, then we are dropping the feature. The game will survive. Players have no idea that the feature should be there. It is not crucial. At least we will add it in an update. And the game they were working on was Hitman. It was a good game. Nobody noticed how many features got dropped during the production, and they didn't crunch at the moment. So there are other approaches. But if the company from top to down is like, we have to do the best thing there is, no matter the cost, well, then you cannot drop features, because that would be defeat. And, you know.
And, well, what you asked about is what every single company in game dev is chasing. How to release games in a timely manner, avoid like bloated production cycles, how to effectively track changes and iterations, and how to effectively prioritize them. Just big focus on efficiency, which I think is a good shift, focusing on efficiency instead of throwing hours at the problem. Or what Artur mentioned a while ago with the hiring and the layoffs, throwing people at the problem. So the platonic ideal of game dev is to have a very skilled, efficient team that can track and organize their work extremely well, while also iterating and maintaining quality, which leads to releasing excellent games on a good schedule.
That's like just for things that's that's easy.
Listen, like it's easy.
Okay, but
exactly.
So, and before I see that you have a question, but before you do, I have that's my observation. I've been in the industry for a very long time, and I saw many approaches to, because companies want to have like better production process, but usually the people who are running the companies, well, myself included, are good at their job. Like they are good designers, they are good artists, programmers, but they are probably shitty managers because they are not managers by trade. And I saw attempts of hiring good managers from other branches of the industry and putting them to run game dev companies, and it was a disaster every single time, because at the same time, I think that you need to really understand how games are made, like on the ground level, to be able to manage them. So my hope is that we will slowly, grew up our own management class, producers class, people who really know how to make games and who will be running game companies more and more efficiently. But I think it's still work in progress. It's better than 18 years ago, but it's far from perfect.
I'd like to respond to your that you posited that people will be now more efficient and groups will be more efficient and people are going into that, companies are going into that. I think this is opening another can of worms. What is efficient? Because if I spend the whole day on developing a feature, which for example at the end of the day I say, okay, my code does not work properly, but I spend the whole day on it. Am I efficient? I proved that +2 is not 5, but I didn't finish my feature. So I'm not sure that efficiency, which is based on, for example, workers in the factory or something like that, It's something that we should be measured by. So I would have to say that we have to redefine the word efficient in order to use it.
Yeah, in context of a creative industry, something
Yes.
like this. Okay.
Yeah, efficiency in, fair enough. Efficiency in producing things that have final value, right? If you're super efficient at doing a feature that doesn't work and gets cut, then you're not being efficient.
But, yes.
I know, no,
Yes.
I understand, like, yes, true.
Yes, I was a part of a conversation in a company in Poland. The owners were worried that people are not working enough, and they decided to track work time. And the conversation were like this: okay, if you track work time, you will train people to sit in front of the computer. But you're not measuring output. You don't know if they are spending the time in a manner that makes sense for the final product. But there are not many solutions on the market. And to be brutally honest, we at the moment are just looking at things how they are, and we are talking about it to you. We don't have solutions. We just are on the stage of learning what is actually happening, so we could start the discussion and looking for solutions.
Exactly. I'm being a smartest over here with my, clever ideas, but I don't have a magic wand. Like, I can diagnose the problem and the trend, but I can't fix it. Now, to do a little bit of an ad, there are a lot of changes in the industry. New methodologies, new approaches, and in order to stay safe during those changes, I really recommend that you either join Polish Gamedev Workers Union or, keep up with us, as our priority is to safeguard all of you through all these different changes and processes. All of us, really, yes.
Yeah. The last questions, and then we probably have to move on.
Thank you. Yeah, my question will be related to the charts about people not being paid for overtime. Maybe I am the lucky one. I have more than 11 years experience in the industry. I had some time working overtime. Would I call it a crunch? Not sure. Like you mentioned, in my early years, I was in the best place there was. I was working in game industry. But overtime, it was there. But I never faced a situation for not being paid for that time. So my question is, maybe you have some thoughts or experiences with that, what makes people tick and stick with the company that is not paying you for your overtime? So what would be the next step? Not paying you for your normal time, and you still...
It sometimes happens. It sometimes happens. I have the privilege to look at the cross-section of the industry. I have friends in companies big and small, and the big companies who are more at the scrutiny of Inspekcja Pracy or the law, they are usually behaving okay. But small companies, not in Warsaw, not in Krakow, but in smaller parts of Poland where there is not so much work and that were established before the remote work, the conditions there are sometimes awful. Not paying for overtime, bosses who don't want to see that their people work overtime, don't want to know that their people work overtime, bosses that are abusing umowa zlecenie, B2B, saying you're not an employee, so why? So it's your responsibility to manage your time. There's...
Yeah, you just need to deliver.
So big companies are in a much better place than even 10 years ago. But there's a lot of smaller companies where things are just awful. And I think that's the answer to your questions. And not everyone feels that they can, that they are in the position to be able to change job. because of their personal circumstances.
And especially in the years 22, 23, and now 24, where are you gonna go?
Yeah.
Who's
Okay.
hiring?
We run out of time. We don't want you to do overtime, so thank you.
Thank you.